Good morning. Before I do anything, I want you to join me in thanking our gracious hosts, Jamie Kabler, Helene Galen, all of the people here at Rancho Mirage at the library who've made this just the most incredible writers' festival in the country. So thank you for having me today. I'm going to take you through a subject that we really don't often want to talk about, but one that has dominated what we're doing now. I have the honor and privilege of being a professor and a director of a center at the University of Southern California, and who would have thought a kid from New Jersey would wind up on the West Coast writing a doctoral dissertation that would become a full studies program at USC, would become a book, and would take me around the world. And I wish that I weren't necessary, but I am, and this is what I do, and this is who I am. So having said that, I grew up in the 60s in Jersey. So for those of you out here from Jersey, that's off of Parkway exit 136. And it was a different time. The 60s, civil rights era, 1968 Olympics with Tommy Smith and John Carlos. I actually got to meet Rosa Parks at a conference that I went to one year. And for me, as an African American in New Jersey, I got the talk. And it's the talk that all parents give their kids, but it's not the talk you think about. It's the talk about how I have to behave. When I'm stopped by the police, when I'm stopped by someone who doesn't know me, when I go into a store and someone follows me around. And no, I didn't grow up in an urban neighborhood. I grew up in a town in New Jersey that had 10,000 people. We didn't have curbs. Both my parents were educators, 3 master's degrees between them. But it didn't make a difference because that's how America was. So as I got stopped by the police one day and came home and told my mom, it's probably the only time I've ever heard her curse in all the years that we were together. And I'll never forget when I was complaining about the police to my dad. He said, "You know what? You can't change the castle from outside the moat." And I'll never forget that. So I got inside the castle, and I'm really happy to be there. I know I have a difficult time. I'm in the School of Public Policy, and I'm having students walk in to ask me, "Professor, do I want to go into public service?" And that's really depressing for me right now. I wouldn't be where I am right now if it weren't for public service. I served in the Schwarzenegger administration as Arnold's appointee responsible for critical infrastructure protection for all the terror targets in the state of California, which, needless to say, is the largest target set we have in the country. Served a Republican governor. Arnold picked what he thought were the best people. I got nominated by President Obama. I was his first nominee to head the TSA. So I say this for all the people with what's going on now. It doesn't matter to people like me in the counterterrorism and intelligence community who's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We have a mission of protecting this country, and that's what we do. Then I went on to LAX. Thank you. I went on to LAX and became assistant chief of police there and just had an incredible time at unfortunately what could be the #1 terror target of airports in the country. So during that throughout my career, was able to go to the FBI, work for counterintelligence and SWAT, and I was undercover. Yes, I've lived all my Jason Bourne fantasies. I had a Maserati for one undercover. I had a show Corvette, traveled around. It was a lot of fun, but I was deep at a point where I couldn't even go in the office. Couldn't play softball with the gang, had to avoid picnics. I had a contact agent who would debrief me. But I was on SWAT almost the entire time I was in the Bureau, and we went to train at a really secluded place in San Diego County. And I'm coming back from training one day, and I'm dressed in a black T-shirt, much like I look in that repelling photograph. And I'm coming back, and I'll just say that I'm in what looks like a government car. I'm stopped at a traffic light, and these 2 guys pull up next to me, and I've got the window up, and I can see that they're flipping me off and saying things that I won't repeat here. And I'm saying to myself, this has got to be the longest light in San Diego County. I'm also saying, since I have the equivalent of a small gun store in my car, they're lucky it's me. So that light starts to change to green, and as I look over, they roll down the window, and one of them sticks out his hand and says, "Heil Hitler." And I had to remember where I was. I was in Fallbrook. And if you don't remember what Fallbrook was like, Tom Metzger was in Fallbrook. And we were investigating him for what was still burning crosses in the 80s, and that's where we were. So we have an adaptive adversary. I lost friends on 9/11. As you know, there was an attack on the World Trade Center in 1993 where they used trucks. And after we decided how to stop that and put countermeasures in place, they decided to be more inventive and more creative. But on that dreadful day, as things started to happen, and I was trying to call to find out how my friends were doing who were in that building, and unfortunately I lost them, this is what we saw on the internet. May the war be started. Death to his enemies. We're thinking it's from some Al-Qaeda network. Al-Sahab is their media branch. And instead, it's coming from the United States. It's coming from Pennsylvania, from August Crease, who's a Grand Dragon in the Klan, and asked Ayman al-Zawahiri, who at the time was number 2 in Al-Qaeda, partner with us. We have the same enemy. The cells are here in place. Fortunately for us, Al-Qaeda and al-Zawahiri blew him off, and that threat didn't metastasize into something else. So let's just look at what's happened since 9/11 up through about maybe a couple of years ago. Here you can see the uptick we've had between jihadists and extremists in the United States who are non-jihadists, and you can see 2 notable upticks in 2008 and 2012. What happened in those years? The election and re-election of Barack Obama. An incredible force multiplier for these organizations, and a whole cast of characters that aren't often mentioned when we talk about terrorism in the United States. And why is that? Because we have a definitional problem. We don't have a definition we agree upon for terrorism in the United States, and unless you adhere to a foreign ideology, or an ideology from a foreign country, we charge you with a hate crime. It was nothing more telling than Dylan Ruff, after he had been arrested, to hear the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, say, he has fit all the characteristics for what we would deem domestic terrorism, so we're charging him with a hate crime. That's how it works. James Von Brunn, who walked into the Holocaust Museum. By the way, what's not on my resume is a 9-year incredible career I had at the LA County Museum of Art. And there's only 2 museums in the country that have walk-through metal detectors: the Holocaust Museum in Washington and the Museum of Tolerance in West Los Angeles. Von Brunn walks into the Holocaust Museum, kills a guard there. He's in his 70s when he engaged in that attack, a neo-Nazi Holocaust denier. Richard Deere, an anti-abortion adherent who goes into an abortion clinic and kills an Iraqi war veteran, an off-duty police officer, and a mom of 2 kids, with 2 kids. Kevin Harfum, who was going to bomb the Martin Luther King Day parade in Illinois, we gave him inert devices as part of an FBI sting operation. We stopped that plot. Michael Wade Page, who went into the Sikh community in Wisconsin. The Sikh community is the most targeted religious minority in this country because most of their attackers think they're Muslim because of their traditional garb. He goes in and shoots a whole collection of people there before he's taken into custody. And then Dylan Roof, who requires and deserves no introduction. So I'm going to give you this for the entirety of my talk. There's a lot of opinions out there, but in my world without data, as W. Edwards Deming said, you're just another person with an opinion. So let's talk about facts and data as we go through this. And a report came out in 2009 from the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and I promise not to give you an acronym without saying what it is. I live with people who speak in acronym paragraphs. There's nothing more annoying. So the DHS INA, which is Department of Homeland Security's Intelligence and Analysis section, put a report together, and I'll give you the highlights. They said, we're going to have an uptick in extremism. We're going to see recruitment efforts made on returning United States veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. I was Obama's nominee at the time. I wish I could have spoken to Secretary Napolitano to say, please don't label that report the way you're going to do it. And they did. It was called right-wing extremism. It was dead on arrival. She was vilified. The report was pulled. She apologized to Congress, apologized to our veterans, and then things started happening. We did a survey several years ago, one of my colleagues in another university on the East Coast, of local law enforcement, asking them, who are your top 3 domestic terror threats? And here's what they came back with. The first on the list were sovereign citizens. Sovereign citizens, for the sake of this discussion, are people who don't believe the United States government is legitimate. They don't pay taxes. They don't have to comply with law enforcement. The officers you see there stopped the father and son team, Jerry and Joseph Kane, on a highway in West Memphis, Arkansas. They got out, the dad got out with a fake driver's license. This is all on video if you go to YouTube. Pushed one officer as his son bailed out of the car with an AK-47 and executed both of them. The real sad part of that story, if it's not sad enough, is that the chief, who happened to be on arrival back to the city, came to the scene and didn't know till he got there and pushed his officers aside that his son Brandon was one of those fallen officers. The chief now travels around the country educating law enforcement on sovereign citizens. He said if that report were around, my son might be alive, because of a deep, detailed explanation of who sovereigns are. Second in that survey were Muslim extremists. So here you're looking at Edward Archer and Officer Hartnett, who's on patrol in Philadelphia, and Archer's walking across the street in a white lab coat shooting at the car door. That officer took 10 rounds in his left arm as he braced it against the window before he returned fire, hitting Archer, taking him into custody, who, as he was arrested, says, I'm swearing allegiance to ISIS, I'm following Allah, but again, because he just said it and we don't charge people with terrorism, another threat that just went away and people don't even know about. Third in that survey were anti-government organizations and militias. So on the Clive and Bundy Ranch, we have Amanda and Jared Miller who go up there, and Jared's working security when the Bundys find out he's a convicted felon, and they say, we got to get him out of here. He's armed, that's going to cause us problems. He leaves, they go back to Las Vegas, he's upset because we were there doing our duty, and they didn't appreciate our support. We got to go out and do something. They go out to CC's Pizza on the Strip in Las Vegas. Saldo and Beck are having lunch there. They execute both officers. They drop one flag with a swastika on one officer's body, another flag, the Gadsden flag, don't tread on me, in the other officer's body, take their weapons away. Long story short, they go across the street to Walmart where they kill another citizen, and then eventually Jared's killed by SWAT and Amanda takes her own life. Just 2 weeks ago, we had militiamen who were convicted in a bombing plot of a Somali community in the Midwest. These guys were going to kill immigrants because they shouldn't be here. I mean, they were just convicted several weeks ago. And it wasn't the only plot we've had in the last couple of years. And then it gets more deadly. We have a march in Dallas, Texas. To make a long story short, 5 officers get killed when Micah Johnson takes up a position of advantage and basically, as a sniper, killing those 5 officers. 8 days later, Gavin Long does the same thing in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Both these guys who were anti-government adherents, and guess what? Both these guys returning veterans. Micah Johnson from the United States Army, Gavin Long, United States Marine Corps. So everything in that report from 2009 is starting to come to fruition. So let me just say this. I'm pretty apolitical when it comes to what I do and what I write, but I write a lot of op-eds, and I wrote an op-ed piece after the attack in Dallas because the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party at that time said the officers got killed in Dallas because of President Obama. And that had crossed a line for me because I knew the history of what had happened in that attack and who was involved. And I just said, you know, there's a lot of things going on in the country right now, and you remember some of the things that were said during the campaign. And I said, you don't get to play footsies with white supremacists and pretend that you're not complicit in some way. Well, I have a friend at the USA Today newspaper, and I said, I need a favor. My mom's in her 80s. She's not into the tech world. I know everything we put out is online. What would it take to put my op-ed in the paper? She says, well, Erroll, we don't really do that anymore, but we'll try. She not only put it in the USA Today paper, she put it in a Monday morning edition. That's the front door of my house before that article went out. That's the front door of my house the day after the article went out, after the drive-by on my home. My wife came home, found the front door like that. And in that article it says I'm a former FBI agent, a former assistant chief of police, and someone found out where I lived anyway and decided to let me know how they felt about that article. That's my front door now. Does that stop me in any way? Not at all. Not at all. So let's talk about police shootings for a moment. The police shootings that we've had up through several years ago, for about almost the past decade, 83% of police officers that were in shootings with known extremists, those people involved in those shootings were from the right wing. And so we have a deep concern about what's being portrayed as the threat in this country and what the real threat is. And let me talk about Mr. Paddock, who we thought was, by the way, incredibly diabolical plot. We couldn't figure out the ideology. We couldn't figure out the motivation. He's in Las Vegas. He's a winner. He's retired. He usually has no problems. Well, guess what we found out? After a deeper dive, he believed that Katrina was a FEMA conspiracy, a practice run, to go across the country and seize weapons from people who own them legally. He also felt that Waco and Ruby Ridge and armed standoffs we had in the FBI were perpetuated by us killing innocent women and children who were United States citizens on behalf of the United States government. So for all of you out there now who are concerned about Paddock and him having no connectivity, that's been taken care of. We now know why. The Obama factor looms large. When I was at the airport police, Senator Obama, we quadrupled our efforts to protect him when he came to Los Angeles to speak. During the first year of his term, he got 30 threats a day. By comparison, George W. Bush used to receive on average 8 threats per day. In the first 3 years of his first term, we had a 755% increase in the memberships into armed militias and anti-government groups. He became a poster boy. And if you don't know, we have the first white supremacist website in the world is called Stormfront. On the day Barack Obama was elected, Stormfront, who at the time was receiving about 50,000 hits per day, they received so many hits that their site crashed. What we've seen over time is that anti-government groups typically peak during Democratic administrations and decrease during Republican demonstrations. You can see if you look at Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, up again dramatically for Barack Obama, and the troubling pattern we see now is it's not trailing off. It's maintaining itself for the first time ever as we've followed these groups. Charlottesville was a pivotal moment, and it's going to be interesting to see how it's looked at years from now, but let me just say this to you. We knew Charlottesville was going to happen. I was at a conference in New Orleans about 4 days before that happened. I said, we're going to be lucky if we get out of Charlottesville with nobody getting killed. I was hoping I was going to be wrong. We saw groups that don't play well together agree for one of the first times in history to all be there and all work together. Neo-Confederates, white supremacists, alt-right, because they had a common enemy. And why do they go to these events? The same reason they always do, to exercise their First Amendment privileges and rights, but most importantly, to become victims. Because they know that the counter-protest movements are going to be 4 and 5 times as large. And if they can be victimized, they can recruit off of that. And they've done that quite successfully. They didn't anticipate Heather Heyer becoming the victim of James Fields. And that destroyed all their plans. And it splintered them back to about the point where they were before that as of this day. Also in Charlottesville, we had a lot of folks down there. Mr. Pistolis was an active duty Marine, engaged in the brutality. We had a UCLA doctoral student who was there, also engaged in the brutality. What's happened, fortunately, since then, is many of these people have been identified and they're being prosecuted. So the word now amongst these groups is stand down. We don't want to engage in these kinds of activities. We don't want to be identified. We don't want to be prosecuted. What's really disturbing is that these groups have become incredible students of ISIS. They are mirroring their tactics, they're mirroring their strategies, and it's working for them. You know, I'll kind of put it to you this way. Al-Qaeda used to be covert. When they recruited, no one knew how to get to them, no one knew how to join. They were very secretive about their process. They would bring people on board. ISIS decided to reverse that strategy. You can go online today, find out how to join ISIS, where to go, what to buy, what will happen when you get to Turkey, how they'll move you into Syria and Iraq, we kind of jokingly say in the counterterrorism community that Al-Qaeda had the public school approach. Al-Qaeda had the Ivy League approach, and ISIS had the public school approach, where they took everybody. Their attitude was, if you come to us, we'll use your skill set. We now see a 600% increase in white nationalists engaging throughout this country. They're outperforming ISIS in every social metric online, especially in Twitter and those other kinds of online measures that they use, as well as the dark web and Tor. For those of you who know what it is, they're very proficient in that kind of strategy. The most popular theme we see out there is white genocide. And by the way, if you follow these groups as I do, diversity is code for white genocide. And that's what's driving the recruitment, that's what's driving the strategy. The FBI, almost 2 years ago, actually went on the record and said that white nationalism is now as much of a threat to the United States as ISIS. And that's where we are. Again, almost triple the number of attacks as some of the Muslim extremists in this country. But again, we don't classify these attacks as terrorism because they're not connected to a foreign ideology, they're not connected to a foreign country. So there are many of them you'll never hear about. Let me just tell you how deep and how close this goes. There's a group called RAM. They're the Rise Above movement. These guys are in towns along the coast that are typically known for volleyball and surfing. Torrance, Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach, Newport Beach. That's where they're from. Most of them are convicted felons. They become basically a modern-day fight club. They go to these rallies for the same reason that Antifa goes to these rallies, is to fight. And they're having an incredible amount of success. They've got a website. They've got a clothing line. They just returned from a European tour, and they're gaining traction. 4 of them, fortunately, were just indicted 2 months ago and we're making progress. On top of that, we've got Atomwaffen Division, which is a branch that has a huge following in Europe. And by the way, as I'm describing all of this to you, although I'm talking about homegrowns, this is the reason that I'm in France quite often, I'm in London quite often, because they're having the same problem. We're not importing this problem anymore, neither are they. These are all people born and raised where they are, engaging where they are. Atomwaffen has been very, very aggressive in recruiting on our college campuses. Why? Why not? I'd want smart and intelligent people too, young, impressionable people that I can recruit to get them into these movements, and they're having success. What you'll see if you ever are watching these protests, Atomwaffen, RAM, they typically wear these masks with the skull from the nose down. Antifa, they typically wear what's called a balaclava, which covers their entire face except for their eyes. So if you're ever watching these protests in the future, you know which group is which. They face off at every protest that they can get together. They have a history now over the last several years of coming into contact with each other. And if I haven't gotten your attention quite yet, now we have a group called the Base. For those of you who followed Al-Qaeda over the years, you know that Al-Qaeda, translated from Arabic to English, is the base. I don't know if there's any coincidence, but this group happens to be a neo-Nazi organization that is now training across the United States, preparing for the Civil War. They are adopting the ISIS playbook. They're going online, asking people to sign up for meetups. They get vetted, and then you go out and train with them. Their leader, quote unquote, is Norman Spear. So far, obviously, I guess I don't have to say to anybody here, they're definitely on the radar screen for the Bureau. But they're engaged in things that are typically and perfectly legal. Some of their posters, and you can see that the Base has adopted the same garb, if you will, as Atomwaffen Division, the same as RAM and others that are following them. Needless to say, what's happened over time, and I have a very close working relationship, but we do a lot of research with the ADL, with the Anti-Defamation League. And we now have anti-Semitism that's been almost unprecedented from the time it's been recorded in this country since the 70s. We have the largest single increase on record happen this past year. We now have the second largest number since ADL has tracked it over the last 40 years. This is something that should not be ignored. It is also something that's happening in France and in other countries by people that are there, being carried out by everyone. If you look at France, it's everyone from the jihadists to the neo-Nazis. And it's become increasingly more dangerous and increasingly more troublesome. So as I said earlier today, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. We had 50 extremist-related deaths last year. All 50 deaths were carried out by people that were attached to the right wing. And so, needless to say, we are quite busy and following this extremely closely. I always am asked, Erroll, what keeps you up at night? And I'm always hesitant to say that, especially on the record, because you never know. You don't want it to become true. And you don't really want to tell people how bad it can get. But I'll just say this now since it's already happened. I always felt like I live in this world of what if, and we reverse engineer attack methodologies at my university where we do research. The average person, if you put them in a room, or if you put a group of people together, all of you would probably come up with about 1,000 different ways to attack a target if I gave it to you. We have game theoretic algorithms where we can sit down, put in the target, put in the options, and come up with 10,000 ways to do it. And then we select what's going to give us the highest utility. By utility, I mean fatalities and injuries, critical infrastructure disruption, economic losses, and of course, psychological impact. So now I can say, if my greatest fear and what keeps me up is an ideologically motivated shooter that goes into a school, we're there. Parkland, Nicholas Cruz. Here's what we pulled after we did the investigation into his social media and his hard drive. I hate Jews, N-word immigrants in a chat group. Murica, which is often kind of a code word for these groups. Code words like Zog, Zionist-occupied government, and mud people when they refer to people of non-European ancestry. But you can see here, Cruz wasn't just a school shooter. He talked about killing Mexicans, keeping black people in chains and cutting their necks. And here he is online, his own website. The following week, the shooting that didn't get as much attention happened in Texas by Demetrius Pagortzis, who wore a Nazi uniform during the school attack. And here he is. That's his following on his Instagram accounts. He only followed 13 Instagram accounts. Now, I have a daughter. She's on every social media like every other 19-year-old. They don't follow that few accounts unless they're really interested in the people, and you can see who he's following there. So we have some issues and we have some concerns. At Aztec High School, I used to be a gang officer in Santa Monica when I was there, and there's nothing more troubling than having to go to a parent, tell that parent that their son or daughter got killed in a drive-by shooting, and A, have that parent tell you, I honestly didn't know that he or she was a gang member, and B, I didn't know they had that tattoo. Well, it happened again. Casey Marquez and Francisco Fernandez at Aztec High School were killed by William Atchison. William Atchison, we find out after the attack, he's got typical teenage complaints. Everything sucks. But more importantly, his parents didn't know he had that swastika tattoo on his leg. Exactly. Where were they? Where were they? So now let me tell you what we are doing. And I wish we didn't have to, but here's where we are. I'm now working on a project with our School of Engineering, and we have a center called ICT, the Institute for Creative Technologies. We're doing virtual reality work. We're so far ahead in virtual reality work, we do a lot of work with the Department of Defense, that the goggles you see people wear in virtual reality, we weren't using goggles over 10 years ago. You could walk into a room like this, and we could put you in Baghdad. Sights, smells, temperature, everything. And all the people that you'd engage with there are avatars. Wow. And we can induce the behaviors of those avatars to see what we want to have you do as a reaction. We are now looking at, that's the title of a National Science Foundation study that I'm now working on, the impact of building design attributes on occupant behavior in response to active shooter incidents in offices and schools. We are experimenting with building design. I hate to say this, but you need to know. We're experimenting with building design. Can we design a building that if an active shooter enters it, you intuitively would be able to shelter in place or evacuate more quickly? In other words, if an active shooter entered this library, would it be more advantageous for those doors to be behind me or for those doors to be on this wall? Would it be more advantageous for the hallways to be narrower or wider? I spoke to Ratan Tata after the Mumbai attack in 2008. And Mr. Tata, as you know, the Taj Hotel was one of the targets. What we did in India is we narrowed the hallways. And he's also built the hotel in a way that if you stand on any floor in the atrium, you can see every point in that atrium from anywhere you are. So for his security personnel, it's perfect. So what we're doing now is we'll have shooters that'll be avatars that will enter these designs that we have for schools and designs we have for offices, and we'll try to determine, is there a way for us to design these schools and offices such that you could get out faster through virtual reality. And it's a 3-year study, and we're working on that now. I want to thank Helene and Jamie again because I've had 2 summits the past 2 years. I'm at a center who focuses on violence prevention. Needless to say, our 2 areas of expertise are homegrown terrorism and school violence. I never thought school violence attacks would eclipse terrorist attacks in this country. That's where we are. So we had a Homegrown Violent Extremism Global Summit last year. And this year, thanks to their support, we had a Safe School Summit, and we did it virtually. We did it virtually because we wanted to appeal and grab the largest audience we could, knowing that we could only get a few hundred people in town and gown. So we went online. Now I want to explain this to you. On the same day that we had our summit is the same day the pipe bomb threat went across the country when there were pipe bombs being delivered and mailed to certain members of Congress and former administrations. We still had over 5,000 viewers in 42 states, and what we didn't expect, from 8 countries. So people were interested. The highlight of that summit last year for homegrowns were formers. I do a lot of work with formers, and I have to qualify this because I belong to a group called Life After Hate. Life After Hate is an organization, international organization of former neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Now, I qualify that because if you don't know, it's difficult sometimes to explain to Jews that you are often talking to former neo-Nazis. But there's a purpose here. When I work gangs, the most useful information we got were from former gang members. They know what I'm going to say. What does it sound like for me to say don't join a gang? What does it sound like for me to say don't become a black nationalist or don't become a neo-Nazi? It's different when it comes from someone who's walked the walk. Mubin Sheikh used to be in Al-Qaeda. And Mubin defected, he's from Canada. He worked with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, several successful operations. Now he lectures around the world on why people become jihadists. Tony McAleer is from Illinois. Tony's one of the co-founders of Life After Hate. He's a former leader of the White Aryan Resistance. And then Angela King. I met Angela a few years ago because I'm writing a book on formers. And Angela has a very interesting story about how she got recruited. She was a racist skinhead. She doubted her sexuality, was often engaged in violence, was raped by every boyfriend she ever had. And Angela had a very interesting thing happen that led to her epiphany. When she went to jail, they put her in a wing of that prison with Jamaican girls. And they were the friendliest girls she could have ever met. And she stopped them one day and said, "Why are you talking to me? I'm white." And they said, "Because we're all in here together. You can decide to be alone, but that's your choice." Totally changed her life. And so I work very closely with them. The values of formers, as I have there on the slide, cannot be overstated. Does this look like a couple that's going to buy a ticket to Turkey and go off to Syria to fight for ISIS? They were going to go off to Syria, get married in Damascus, and fight for ISIS. This couple, teenagers from a high school in Mississippi, are now both in prison for 10 years. Because in this country, we have no option. So again, as Ali Safan said the other day, we've got a challenge. And I'm not for trying to dig deep in these organizations and pull somebody out. But there are people that aren't there yet. I work with a group out of Germany called Hayat and Exit Germany. And what they have there are options where people can call, let the government know, and based on where they are in that continuum of radicalization and recruitment, if they're over here, we might be able to counsel them, get them some assistance and get them out. If they're over here, they may be going to prison. But in America now, we don't have that choice. We call, they go to jail. And so that's why we don't get the cooperation that we need. I say all this to say that there is no profile for these people. There is no profile for these groups. Anybody who tells you that they understand radicalization, just walk away, because they don't. If you talk to 10 people that are in an extremist organization, you'll hear 10 different ways about how they got there. We've made this mistake before. You know, in World War II, Jamie's celebrating it now. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, we interned 120,000 Japanese Americans who had never, ever voiced any discontent or disloyalty to this country. Many of those families were separated from each other, from their children. By the end of that war, 4 people were arrested for suspicion of espionage. None of them were of Japanese or Asian descent. Let's not make that mistake again. So I'm going to end this, and I'll take some questions if I may, by saying this. I'm dating myself now. 1984, I'm a Santa Monica police officer. It's the 1984 Olympics. I was in heaven. I affectionately called the 1984 Olympics the 1984 Swatorama and Weapons Expo. Because we had so much firepower that nothing happened for 15 days in LA. I went to gymnastics and watched Mary Lou Retton. I went to Santa Monica College and watched Carl Lewis and his 4x100 team work out. But you might not remember this. McDonald's had a campaign on at that time. And the campaign was, if we got a gold medal, you went to McDonald's and you got a Big Mac. If we got a silver medal, you went to McDonald's and you got fries. And if we got a bronze medal, you could go to McDonald's and get a Coke. It almost bankrupted them. But you know what really is the important part of that 15 days? Is that for every time we have an Olympics, winter or summer, everybody in this country remembers that they're all Americans again. What a concept. You know, if I could take those 15 days and package them and stretch it out over the whole year, year after year, we would be there. Getting along and tolerance. So let me just tell you a little bit of a personal story. I live in a family of tolerance that works really well. My wife's a Bruin. It took me 23 years to radicalize her. She's now a Trojan. My son went to Catholic high school. My daughter went to Jewish day school. But I always say this to people. Look, we have a USC football team with 11 national championships. We have a UCLA basketball team with 11 national championships. It's all good. But I say this because it's all about us agreeing that it's not a perfect world. As long as we recruit from the human race, we're going to have these issues. But we can no longer deny the challenge we face as a country that other countries have faced for some time that have come home for us. So I'm going to say here with a couple minutes, and I'm willing to take some questions, I want to thank you for all you do. I want to thank you for allowing people like me to serve this country, because there's no greater place on earth. As I said, I'm just a kid from Jersey. Who would have ever thought that I would serve a Republican governor who's probably the most popular human being on earth, in Arnold Schwarzenegger, and be nominated by the first African-American president, and be in an organization like the FBI. When the year I entered the Bureau, they had 15,000 applicants. They took 320 people. That's special. And I'm going to add one more. I'm in that 4% of young boys who become an Eagle Scout. And I'm real proud of that. So in closing, just let me say to you, we've got some challenges. We've beat diseases. We've sent people to other planets. We've overcome incredible adversity in this country as Americans. So in the famous words of Winston Churchill, I'll just say, it's not the end, it's not the beginning of the end, but it certainly is the end of the beginning. Thank you very much.